Hey everyone, it's Alisha Braché here at Cosmic Gateway, coming to you with another audio update of just some things that have been stirring quite strongly in my mind, my thoughts and observations that I've been making that I thought might be helpful to help navigate some of what we're going through. This is a bit of a follow on from the previous audio update. So if you haven't listened to that one, I would encourage you to go back and listen to it, as it may join some of the dots and make a little bit more sense. But what I was referring to or talking about was like these predominant three groups moving through these glass ceilings and thresholds and coming into a culmination point where we can merge the high and low points and start to release some of the templates that we've been carrying throughout our awakening or ascension pathway that are no longer valid to the space that we're stepping into. And I think one of the key aspects that is kind of being cleared through is relationship templates. I feel like around June, will be critical to start to reinforce or ground some of the higher templates of relationships and love connections. And I have been inspired to hold another container group over the period of solstice, which I don't have yet available, but keep an eye out because that will be coming up available in a few weeks. Having said that, to be able to establish a clear foundation, some of the things that I've been noticing, especially via dream state, has been what I would call an emptying out process. I've had several dreams intermittently throughout this week where there's been huge energy influxes to help almost flush out the system energetically, a lot of clearing and purification. One night in particular, I felt like I was really integrated into New Earth, interacting with a lot of people and different types of beings who already reside there. And it was like my body was trying to acclimate into that frequency. But in the lead up to that, there was a lot of like clearing, flushing out the system, which can create a lot of blankness, like not a lot of activity, feeling quite solitude, not wanting to interact. I've even found that listening to too much information can be overwhelming the system. It's really a time of silence and introspection primarily. So coming back to the relationship templates, because I think it's key. It's also been highlighted in my dreams of this reconciliation process that's happening by a dream state of dreaming of people who have been significant along the path that may not necessarily be represented in the physical world. And one in particular sort of came through of like giving back items, which I think is hugely significant of this emptying out process, giving back items and having honest conversations. So obviously, if there are people who aren't in our reality, we're still going to be facilitating this in a higher dimensional state. I think what we're seeing for a lot of people who are in other groups, or some of the groups that I'd outlined in the previous video, is a lot of breakdowns of relationships, so breakups, parting ways, highlights of toxicity, codependency, unhealthy relationship dynamics. And this is a huge part of the ascension process, because one of the fundamental aspects of being in 3D is that we kind of come into relationships for a purpose and not necessarily a soul cohesion. And those that are destined on the path that will come into a higher love template, often we have to go through other relationships to help us work through some of our core wounding traumas. Perhaps there's been some past life energies that haven't been reconciled completely. So what happens, and this has been on my mind a lot because this has come through sessions over the years. So just speaking from an energetic perspective, often when there, what I would call a mismatch in frequency relationship come into contact, and there are really important dynamics that have to play out and lessons to be completed. Often there's a veil or a facade that comes over in the energetics that they present like a soul connection. They come in with a lot of heightened, synchronicity and like this magnetism. I think magnetism is probably the best descriptive word. But I feel like that really works at play to bring the dynamic so that we do play out what is necessary. But underneath that, there's not a soul cohesion. There's energetic overlays that we almost wear so that we can bring out subconscious wounding that isn't apparent or at the surface. Just as an example, someone may have experienced abuse in their childhood that may be of a sexual nature or something that has been deeply suppressed within the psyche that's not overtly apparent. This could lead into past lifetime trauma too. It doesn't necessarily have to pertain in this lifetime, but oftentimes it does. So the magnetism is actually a mirroring effect that draws us in to a very likened frequency that's going to help play out those dynamics so that we can actually uncover subconscious wounding and trauma or programs that are at play so that we can actually neutralize them and both, in theory, walk away from that relationship as a more conscious version of ourselves. But often what comes into play in these types of dynamics is something which I'll call a lot more nefarious. When people are in the initial 6-month phase of like the honeymoon phase, often there can be an entity that comes into the relationship shared energetic dynamic. This can be for various reasons, sometimes because there's an illumination of light, and that can attract beings or entities that want to kind of take from that. Often it can be drug or alcohol induced, or it can be because of the intimate or sexual nature that summons a lot of these entities. And what they do is they get attached into the shared energetic field. So this energy or entity will bounce between the relationship, playing the two people off one another, which creates the codependency, the toxic behaviors, abusive behaviors, and it can really destroy two people. It keeps them locked in circumstances and situations that have well and truly passed their expiry date, because the energy that is latched into it is benefiting off their misery, their suffering, the lower vibration that has then become a dominant part of the relationship. And so that's why sometimes we see in extreme cases in domestic violence, and I think that's really heightened at the moment, because what we're witnessing in the collective level of certain trials playing out and all these, I think that brings, regardless of the circumstance and situation, I have my own thoughts on that. And as a side note, I wonder what is actually happening in New York itself or in Manhattan that is happening underground, that when we're looking at these, cases and trials, the distraction that's playing out on the surface, what's actually happening. Because sadly, I don't think, or at least at this stage, it's not revealing the true nefarious nature of what trafficking is. But who knows? Who knows what it will unravel? Hopefully, a lot more information will come to light, whether it's through that or other means. But I think when there's something that's drawing a lot of the collective attention and focus, and the reason I use this as an example is like I can't switch on to any social media right now without having 10 things pop up around that. It heightens that particular theme within the collective field that hopefully brings light to it, that can allow more people to free themselves from unhealthy dynamics. But as I was mentioning, like in extreme cases in abuse or domestic violence circumstances, in let's say true ones, and I've worked in that field for a long time, and people say, why can't they, like, it honestly, when I worked in that field, that was one of the most challenging and hardest fields to ever work in, because you get them to a certain level and they get drawn back in, but often it's the energy or the entity that has latched into the third energy of the relationship dynamic that is the drawing card, that once you can remove that energy or entity from the overlay, you can actually split the energy, clear it, or clear one person or both. It almost breaks the spell, and people can see the dynamic for what it is, and can walk away much easier. But I think we're having like a natural veil being lifted around these type of mismatch dynamics, because there is a higher frequency pushing in to allow more people who are on the path to come into cohesion of right relationship. And so a big part of that is, well, obviously, if there are people in wrongly matched dynamics, they're keeping others, they're kind of, how do I put this picture in my mind into words? But it keeps a blockage to those that are meant to be in true harmonious connection as one aspect of it. But it keeps people away from their mission, from coming into full awareness of who they truly are. But one of the parts of the path is obviously going through these relationships. I think that they are a necessary component, because it helps, if you're working with it consciously, can bring up all the healing necessary to be able to step into that, soul counterpart, twin soul, whatever label you want to put on it. It helps you be able to step into that dynamic. And so it is a reconciliation of the outdated relationship templates that have been in the past. And I know that when I went through my peak experience of last year, well, every time I've kind of gone through a huge frequency jump, even in the beginning of the counterpart journey, I was very much guided to make peace with each of the significant relationships or people who play key roles in my life in order to attune into that higher vibration. So I think that that's a big component, that what may be happening for many people on different levels, depending on where you're at in your circumstance and situation, whether it's going through a breakup and seeing things for what they are, or whether you're on a solo journey processing what has been, or maybe you've gone through a lot of that and there's still energetic debris that's breaking down in your field. that's happening to align you with that higher template that I feel is going to be constructed in a much more tangible way as we move forward into the next month and months ahead. So, man, there's so much I can say about this. But, I've been talking for a while now about the restoration of a right relationship, and we've gone through so many attempts over the last few years, and there's been a lot of interference at play. There's been so many components that haven't allowed that to really drop in and align. But I think we're working on it very steadily and diligently. And so many times what has come up in sessions, especially over the last few months, is that a lot of the strategic delays that have been put in place have kind of been worked through and removed. And we are witnessing the unraveling and moving into the higher timeline expression that we've been working so hard for many, many years. So what this can also be bringing up could be a lot of nostalgia, introreflection, emotions, critical thinking and thought processes. Could be, bleed through of parallel realities, dream state, going through that. I'm just trying to think, there's so many other things that have sort of played out. A lot of, in terms of physical symptoms, I've noticed, especially in the last few days, a lot of fatigue and tired. It's like the body needs so much time to be able to process what it's going through. And this really links into the diamond template that's coming online, because it's so pure and so pristine, so succinct with divine source frequency, or our own divine source frequency. This ongoing process I don't expect to wrap up anytime soon. I think it will be ongoing for at least the next foreseeable future of next few months. It's really giving an overhaul into our entire body and the cellular structure. So I think this piece, I just wanted to highlight the relationship templates that we've worn. Often in soul connections and dynamics, we specifically come in with certain templates or energetic overlays that are designed for us to work through for our own process, but also part of the collective process. Honestly, I do feel, and I don't want to be, get into gender wars, but I do feel the feminine energy, for the most part, has kind of led the way in being able to dive into those pockets and places, and especially be able to go into the reconciliation process with, past relationships and being able to heal. Whereas stereotypically, the masculine kind of can, step away and almost dissociate, or, walk away and not be as introspective. And this is generally speaking, but I feel like there is something really, really profoundly brewing within the masculine collective that is giving them the opportunity to accelerate their process. So I think for some, it's throwing a lot at them all at once. And for others, it's allowing them to deepen into the emotional state, or that reflective state, or they're tapping more into their feminine energy qualities to be able to process this. Because I feel like everyone on this path has to go through their version of this. And, it's quite profound, and I think it then allows us to shed right now, at whatever degree this could be playing out and happening. I think it's allowing us to really align with our pure soul frequency and those that are in alignment and resonance with that. And I think this extent, what I'm speaking about, obviously I've spoken a lot about, intimate relationship dynamics, but I do feel like this is an extension of all different types of soul connections and relationships that don't necessarily have to be romantic by nature. Because I do feel like we're kind of heading more towards a rebuilding or collaborative phase as we tip into the second part of 2025. But I feel like as we're moving through this is definitely an emptying out phase. And I'd love to hear in the comment section what your experiences have been. But it feels like emptying out on all levels. So it can make you feel quite disconnected, even from some of your closest friends, less interactive. And I feel like part of that is like the soul really wants to speak directly and give us the information that we need at this time to help navigate through that. And if we're too filled up with information or conversation or excess energy, we can't get that clarity. And I think speaking into that in a different context for those that may be questioning their relationships and, going into those dynamics of just getting out of sync. And I think one thing that really comes into huge question is when someone is ready to step up and accelerate into their soul path and they're not in, let's say, right relationship or partnership, the gap becomes bigger and bigger and more noticeable. It's almost like you're starting to incorporate a lot more consciousness that you can see things. You have less tolerance of dynamics and behaviors. But one thing that can make that process really challenging is that when you're especially living with someone, you're so enmeshed in their energy, especially if you're energetically sensitive, that sometimes it's really hard to see with clarity, and you need to take that time, if you're in that circumstance, to take that time to kind of step out, be in your own energetic space, and get your own clarity in that way. So I know that's a lot of information. I might wrap it up there. Certainly going to be coming in and talking about other topics that link into the first audio video, but I thought I would share this one around relationships just because it's been in my awareness now for a few days. And once I get this audio process out into video, I'm sure the next topic will come through. If you have any requests of topics that you'd like me to speak to, of perhaps something that you're going through that I haven't covered, please leave a comment in the description box, and I most certainly, would love to cover that. I've got a couple other topics. I think I'll be sharing. I think I would like to talk one specifically around the mind. And programs, even dipping a little bit into mind control and unraveling from those. Energetic bleed through that is occurring a lot with multiple versions or parallel versions trying to integrate, creating physical symptoms in the body. Just trying to think. Obviously, dream space for me is very heightened right now, incredibly vivid, lots of very interesting messages, and also having materialization of beings in the house again, which interestingly enough hasn't happened for over 12 months. And I've gone through this period, having the peak experience that I did in the beginning of last year, and then seemingly feeling quite switched off. It feels like a lot of the senses are coming back online now, and it's almost like rejoining from that higher timeline expression, which I'm quite excited about, because I did get a message just a few days ago upon waking that we've now like rejoined with the highest ascending timeline, and we're on that trajectory. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate everyone. And yeah, look forward to sharing my next musings in the next audio. If you'd like to book a session or connect with any of my programs where I teach all of this more in detail, all the details will be in the description box below. And if not, I will connect with you soon. Thanks. Bye.